All right, we're back. Again, my name is Josh Atwell, Senior Technology Advocate at Splunk, and today I'm going to share a couple of stories and talk about how to be a failure. Okay? Yes, it's a very provocative title, but what I found recently is that we really are uncomfortable with failing. So I'm going to start with a story, little story, a tale of almost failure. Okay? As I was kind of going through my career, I got hired to do automation for an extremely large company that made me very, very nervous because I'd never worked in an environment with thousands of ESXi hosts and tens of thousands of virtual machines. Like all of my automation had been done in smaller environments. And the first project we had was to replace the SSL certificate for every virtual center server that we had and for every ESXi host that we had, thousands of them. Now this project had already been approved, it had already been scoped, it had already been scheduled before I ever joined. I had like 6 weeks before we had it. And it was going over the Memorial weekend, okay? Well, I didn't want to go through that process manually, so I wrote some automation. To check to make sure that all the root passwords were correct to what they were supposed to be for standard. Pop quiz, how many do you think were standard? Not all of them, right? But we found those in advance, planned for that. If you've ever done this exercise, it is agonizing because in order to replace the SSL certificate, you have to disconnect the host from management, okay? Which means for a period of time, you have no visibility into what's going on. Now, do this in an automated fashion across 6 geographies, all going simultaneously with thousands of ESXi hosts with no visibility of what's happening. I execute the script, we sit, and we wait for 10 minutes, for 20 minutes, 30 minutes. About 45 minutes later, I'm sweating because our entire virtual environment is now completely disconnected. I nuked the site from orbit. It's the only way to be sure. And they weren't showing up as reconnected. I thought I had failed. I started panicking. I start trying to SSH to some of the ESXi hosts to see if they're there. Turns out everything was working just fine. I just needed to refresh Virtual Center Server. Okay? But this goes to the important part here. What is happening in our brains? Because when I was writing the automation, I was excited because it was working in the test environment. So my body was releasing endorphins and dopamine and serotonin, all of these great chemicals that go through our body that make us feel like happy. Most importantly, they make us feel encouraged to do that activity again. Right? Swinging on a swing, roller coasters, these types of things, like these are things that get us going. That was me during testing phases, right? The script is awesome. It's going to be amazing. When I thought things were going wrong, my body was releasing cortisol. And I don't know if I'm saying that exactly right. I'm not a doctor and I don't play one on TV. But what this does do is it causes your higher functioning parts of your brain to give up. Like, I just can't even, as I think the kids say, right? And your lower activities, right? Your fight or flight and your desire to, like, just protect yourself, your body's self-defense system starts to kick in. And you start feeling hopeless. You start feeling as if, there's no way you're going to get out of this. You're demoralized. I was feeling terrible because I had this other guy that was depending on me to shorten up the weekend. He wanted to have a holiday. And you're very anxious, right? This is what your body does, okay? But I've interviewed a lot of people in preparation for this talk, and there's one feeling that is consistent. Every single person I've talked to in dealing with an IT operations failure, or failure in general. Anybody want to guess what that feeling is? You felt it. I've let someone down, right? I was talking to somebody, had a wireless access point project, executed a command to open up jumbo frames on all the access points. Whoops, wasn't correct. He was really worried about letting down the customer and the engineers that he'd been working on, right? This is our most common response, that I've let someone down. Interestingly enough, though, in almost every scenario I've talked to people, the response to failure has not aligned with the concern that people have had, right? Every single time it's, okay, let's get things back to normal, right? And then let's figure out how we learn from this. How do we improve from this? And in preparation for this talk, I found this fantastic quote that I love. I'm not a failure. I simply failed at doing something. Okay? And we experience this all the time. And it's important that we experience it because, frankly, it's how we grow, right? It's how we improve. There's this wonderful video. I don't include it on this talk today because it's for the longer talk where I would play this video. But Will Smith talks about failure and success. And he uses one example in that I think is important. If you exercise and work out and you're lifting weights, your muscles get sore because you have failed your muscles. They have broken down and they have to rebuild themselves. But when they rebuild themselves, they are stronger, right? That's the whole thing. So failure is an exercise specifically for making you stronger. So how do we do this in a systematic way and make it part of our culture and improve that view around failure? Well, first we ask a question. Do your systems check for failure? I read this story about a person sitting on a plane and they had the intercom on, and the pilot says to the co-pilot, "Thank you for checking that altitude setting. I had it wrong by 8,000 feet." This was a process that was in place where the co-pilot was checking the configurations and settings that the pilot did to prevent failure, right? This was process and people and technology working together. In our world, we put more emphasis, usually, in the technology to help us, to the technology to tell us what's going on. Per my story, the technology was not helping me. It was not refreshing. That was my misunderstanding of what was going to happen at scale, right? So it was not helping me, all right? Which then leads to, do you have the information that you need in order to prevent failures? Failures are going to happen. And we'll talk about how we respond to those in a minute. But oftentimes, the way that we fail and the mistakes that we make are avoidable, right? That's what we do after we fail. We figure out how we avoid that. I was just talking to one of you earlier about when I was implementing log analytics and dashboards and all. One of the things that we absolutely required was that if there was a Sev1 outage, we had to identify, did we root cause that, or did we identify what happened through this tool or not? And if we didn't, why not? Did we have the data that we needed? Were we just not presenting it? Were people not seeing it because it wasn't top of mind? What was that, and how can we remedy that? And as we got good with doing that for Sev1s, guess what? Sev1s went down. Then we applied it to Sev2s. Guess what? Sev2s went down, right? Because then we were able to improve how we were responding to failure. If you do any research about failure, you will inevitably hear about this, right? Gene Kranz, Apollo 13. We've all seen the movie, right? If you haven't, you really should see the movie, okay? It's a movie about a failure that happened on a spaceship. But when Gene Kranz tells all of NASA, when they lock the room and they have to find a solution to save these astronauts that are on their way to the moon, their systems are failing, when he says failure is not an option, he's not talking about we can't make any mistakes ever. The mistake had already happened. What he's talking about is that the stakes for another failure are too high, right? That is our motivating factor. Fortunately for us, we don't typically have to deal with those kinds of mistakes, those kinds of failures, right? We are not dealing with life or death the way they had. So we can bring that down a little bit, right? I get anxious just thinking about it. It's the reason I've never worked in hospitals. Like I can't emotionally handle that. Okay. Now, when we do have to deal with failure, it's really important to focus on the things that are in your control. One of the problems with the Apollo 13 is they didn't feel like they had a whole lot of control. How did they solve the problem? They identified all the things that were in the space capsule that they could use in order to, I think they were having to scrub carbon dioxide, right? They had to find a way to do it with the parts that were there. It's not like they could Amazon Prime Now them something. It's not an option, okay? In order to control your variables, some of the variables that you can control is improve your skills, right? Make yourself better skilled in the tasks that you're doing, increasing your knowledge about the systems and the things that are doing. Interestingly enough, collecting data helps with that. Doing more planning. In the longer talk, I tell a story about how I scared a junior admin doing an Active Directory controller upgrade for a site. It's a great story. Next time. Improve your relationships with the people that you work with, right? You can control that so that when you fail, you don't have to fail alone. More on that in a second. And then most importantly, just better preparation. Not preparation for the activity per se, but preparation on how you will respond when and if you make a mistake. Because let's be clear, we're all going to make mistakes. It happens, okay? In IT, one of the biggest things that drives me crazy around failure is this feeling or concept that you're going to lose your job if you make a mistake. Show of hands, and you can just mentally show your hands if you don't want to admit this. Have you made a mistake where right after you felt like you were going to lose your job for that mistake? Okay? If you're in IT, you most likely have. There is a book that I highly recommend for everyone called Beyond Blame. And the big thing is to move beyond blame. It doesn't really matter what's to blame, right? Because you'll ask, is it the person that's responsible, or was it the system? Because the person executed a command that they've executed hundreds of times, it's just this time it broke. So is the system broken? Or is the system broken, or is the process broken, right? Was the system flawed, or the process acting on that system flawed, okay? What you want to do is, instead blaming, set yourself up for success, to identify, okay, these are the checks and balances. The system is designed to allow you to do this, but not do that. Remember the S3 outage, or the brownout that they had on S3 a while back? The problem was not a result of the administrator doing something they weren't supposed to do. It's the system allowed that administrator to do things at a scale that should not have been allowed. Right? That was the postmortem outcome. So they put protections in place that would prevent that activity from taking out that number of systems in the future. There is also some sage advice from a place that we may not have expected. Yoda teaches Luke that failure, most of all, is the greatest teacher, because it is in failure that we learn and grow. Right? Luke, in his pursuit to become a Jedi and being trained by Yoda, Yoda wasn't giving him softballs that he was going to be able to accomplish easily. He was giving him things that he was potentially going to fail at, that he was going to have to struggle. And what separates people who might consider themselves failure, or we might consider failures, and those who are not, are how they respond to that, how they learn, and how they grow from that. So when we talk about how to respond to failures, we have to keep in mind that a lot of this is learned behavior that we learn from our culture and the people around us. And the biggest question I get a lot of things that I talk about is like, how do I change that culture? Well, it's pretty consistent, and failure is no exception. First off, lead by example. Show how you want people to respond when things fail. Right? Show them how to support one another in a failure scenario. Where possible, set up your scenarios and your systems to where when failure happens, it happens safely. Okay? Now, sometimes that happens in your test environment, but the point is that you don't have to worry as an administrator running a command is going to knock out an entire service globally or regionally or things like that. Set the systems up so they fail. In the world that we live in the NewOps world, the DevOps world, the digital transformation world, we have to iterate more quickly, which means we are more likely to fail. The successful companies are not the companies that don't fail. They're the ones who become proficient at responding to failure. In a world where we only deploy software once every 6 12, or 18 months, and the average tenure of a system administrator and engineer in an organization is 3 years, how many opportunities do those engineers and administrators have to deal with potential failure? It is a practiced behavior. It's a learned behavior. And then finally, with the blameless postmortems. It does not matter if somebody did something that they were not supposed to. I'm currently watching the program Chernobyl. That is traumatizing TV. That is failure in an epic state. And the failure came down to people turning off safeguards that existed. The real question for me, when we think of everything I've talked about, is why were those safeguards allowed to be shut off in the first place? That was the bigger failure. But it's turtles all the way down, right? Like, you can keep going and figure out like where that happens. So it's not about pointing blame. It's what happened in the system and the processes, and how do we prevent it from happening again. And I'll kind of close out with this. And I love this from Thomas Edison. He's famously known for creating the light bulb, right? Thousands of materials that never worked. And he'll say, he's like, I learned 1,000 ways to not make a light bulb. That was his perspective, right? But he also makes a good point, is that many people who feel like they have failed never realize how close they actually got to being successful. They've given up just shy. And this is both from an organizational standpoint and the work that we do and the relationships that we have. You know, and it's because when we fail and make mistakes, our brain, our body is producing things that puts us in that defensive position. We have to be mindful of that and train ourselves to not succumb to that, right? To learn how to respond to that failure. So here's how to take it home. And by the way, failures can be fun. I tried to view a thing, Good Morning America. Don't ask why it was Good Morning America. And got the funnest 404 I've seen in a while, right? That was a failure, but that was a handled failure, right? All right, so make failure a positive force function, right, in the work that you're doing, okay? Make it to where when failures happen, great, this is a learning opportunity, not something that we need to completely avoid. Create safe environments to fail. Make it so it's comfortable that if you fail, you can recover and people feel like they can experiment and move forward. Help other people handle failure. You have seen the coworker who is not handling failure well. Refer them to this talk. Encourage them that it's okay, it all happens. And don't quit. Don't give up, okay? Because you're not really a failure. You just failed at doing something once. Thank you.